Okay, thanks, Connor. Okay, welcome everybody to the Schools Forum meeting on Monday, the 17th of January 2022. And I think I'm just going to hand straight over to Fred to give us some of the housekeeping rules.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to advise members that we're now live. This is being streamed so that members of the public can access it as well if they want to. We might still get a few members that turn up within the next few minutes, so we'll let them in as we can. I think there's one panel member who hasn't got access to microphone or camera, so she'll be putting stuff into the chat. I don't think anyone external can see that chat, so if anything crops up during that time, one of the officers will let you know about that. I think other than that, Chair, we're good to go through the agenda. Okay, thanks very much. It does look actually that my chat started to work again now, so we'll just keep an eye on that as we go. But obviously the best way for anybody to show that if they want to say anything or to share anything is to raise your hand on the board there. Right, okay, so starting off then, apologies for absence. Yes, Chair, apologies from Darren Barton and Lynn Howard.
Thanks very much. Have we got any declarations of interest? No, none visible. Okay, so if we go straight on to the minutes of the last meeting. Now, there's a substantial number of minutes starting from page 9 on my notes. So we'll probably do them, if we can, in some sort of group so that we can follow up with any matters arising as we go. Okay, so if we just start off on page 9 then. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Anything on page 13? Page 14. Page 15. Page 16. Has anybody got any matters arising up to page 16? No, okay, so from page 16 onwards then, on the de-delegation proposals, and then page 17, education function proposals, page 18, in terms of matters arising on page 18, is there any further to report on the review of the safeguarding and attendance team?
No, there's nothing to report at this time. I think what was stated in the report was that it would come back to the June meeting.
Yeah, okay. Just seems quite a long way between meetings. Okay, rest of page 18. 19. Anything on page 20, the trade union responses? No, page 21. 22. Page 23, which is essentially the numbers for the votes. 24, and page 25 from the Heinies block monitoring report. Page 26, 27. Any matters arising up to page 27? Okay, page 28. 29. Page 30. Page 31. Page 32. Page 33. And page 34. And at the bottom of that page, we're getting to the conclusion to the proposals, if anybody's lost track of where we are yet. We've got page 35. Page 36, other considerations for the high needs block. Page 37. Page 39, and we're on the early years entitlements funding rates for 22, 2022, 2023. Page 39. 40. 41. Page 42. And finally, page 43. Okay, so final opportunity for any matters arising, any changes to minutes? No, I think we're good to approve those then, Fred, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Right, okay, so moving on to item number 4, the dedicated schools grant allocations and the draft schools budgets for 22-23. And that's over to you, Rose, please.
Okay. There's a lot of feedback. I don't know if everybody else is getting it. But,
no, it's just a reminder for people to put microphones off if they're not talking. It could well be me, actually. Let me try.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of this report, it just gives the outline of the dedicated school grant allocations that were announced in December for 2022-23, and the table included under section 4.1 provides the actual allocation. So 308.4 million in terms of initial allocation. The adjustment of 2.961 relates to rates, which from 2022-23 the DfE will be directly responsible for paying rates for schools. And then that would leave an adjustment of 305.5 million. The central schools block at 2.283 million with no adjustments. The high needs block is 61.267 million before adjustments. The 3.130 is with regards to place adjustments for place funding. So then left with a net of 58.137 million, and then early years 23.387 million with no adjustments. So 395 million in total before adjustments and 389 million after adjustments of those 6 million as outlined. And then under section 4.2, I've included a table there which gives a comparison of the funding and the pupil numbers between the announcements made for 2021, those initial announcements, and compared to the initial announcements for 22-23. So you can see there that, you know, the amounts by year for the schools block, and you can see the increase in pupils. So some of the funding is related to increase in the number of pupils, but also some of the funding increase relates to the increases as announced by the government in 2019. So, I mean, it's all set out in that table in terms of central school services block, the high needs block, the early years block. I suppose the thing to point out there is that there is a reduction in funding between the years, and that's because there's less pupils or children picked up in the censuses between the financial years, and that's largely due to COVID. So that just, you know, to bear that in mind. The early years pupil premium increasing slightly, and as well as the disability access fund for 22-23 increasing slightly to 118 million. The other thing to make you aware of is that in terms of the DfE, they have agreements in place with all of the agencies listed under 4.3 to purchase a single national license, which is managed by the DfE, and that's for all state-funded schools. So this includes academies as well as maintained schools. And what the DfE/ESFA do is deduct that charge direct from our DSG allocation. And this is for copyright licenses. Well, it's for licenses in general. And the cost for 2022-23 is 284,000 excluding VAT. And this is funded from the Central Schools Services block of DSG. In terms of the early years block, that is indicative, and it's based on the census taken in January 21 for schools, early years and alternative provision. The final allocations will be based on 5/12 of the January 22 census plus 7/12 of the January 22-23 census numbers. So we will get that information later on in the financial year. Again, with the high needs block, the allocations are provisional and will be updated during the year. So the import and export adjustment will be updated in the summer term of 2022. And then the DfE will make further adjustments in April in terms of any place funding deductions for the academic year 2022-23 to reflect the outcomes of the place change notification and to reflect further academic conversions that was submitted in November of last year. So that's talking about the DSG allocations. I don't know if there's any questions that anyone's got there before I move on in terms of the school's budgets for 22-23. No,
okay. Good to go again, Rose. Thank you.
Okay, so then in terms of the schools block funding, we can see under section 4.7 in the table there, the schools block allocation of 305.5 million, less the pupil number growth of 1.3 million that was agreed. And so that gives schools block DSG available for distribution to schools of 304.2 million. And basically the schools funding model in order to calculate the schools funding for schools has been submitted to the DfE prior to the deadline of the 21st of January 2022, and that's for review and final confirmation. Also, a cabinet report has been submitted and agreed. I think are we still within the 5-day scrutiny period, Michael? I think so. We're still within the 5-day scrutiny period, but in terms of this is what's been submitted to cabinet. So on the table under 4.9, where it was agreed that the primary secondary ratio would be 1 to 1.29. And basically all of the rates listed for primary and secondary, those are the rates as they were for 2021-22. And the rates that we are waiting to confirm are the free school meals rate and the free school meals ever 6, as well as the minimum funding guarantee and the minimum funding guarantee ceiling. So we're waiting. The model has been submitted to the DfE, and we're waiting for them to approve and quality assure and make sure that it meets all of the regulations. And once that's been confirmed, and then confirmed with Michael and the Section 151 officer, we will then be able to release the figures for those that are still outstanding. And so basically that's the end of my report. So I don't know if there's any further questions.
Michael?
Yeah, there's no questions. It's just a comment. Thank you very much for outlining that, Rose. I was just going to say for forum members' benefits that it went to Cabinet last Wednesday on the 12th of January, and the proposals were agreed by Cabinet. So both the funding, etc., has gone forward. So when we've had the 5-day period, which will end on Tuesday, we'll be able to go forward and have those amounts published. But I think from that point of view, Cabinet members were very keen to move forward with supporting the proposal that went forward as part of that Cabinet paper, and also acknowledge some of the feedback that primary heads in particular put forward in terms of the funding rates, and appreciated that as part of the Cabinet paper that went on the 12th of January. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much, Rose. That'll take us on to item number 5. Oh,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just read in the comments about Michael's got to leave by 3 o'clock and he's got a verbal update. So it might be prudent to perhaps take Michael next so he's free to leave when he needs to, and he can get this item in now, if that's okay.
yeah, that's fine. So, okay with you, Michael? Can you go now?
Thanks, Jay.
Great. The two things I was going to share as part of the verbal update, and I apologise, I have to leave earlier. COVID has struck our household as well, so I've got to go. I've got a child at home. I've got to pick another one up from school. But in terms of the pieces I wanted to make, school improvement, I know you've heard me say this before, and it's no surprise. The Department for Education concluded its consultation and have now put forward the results of that consultation, which effectively means that school improvement will be reducing by 50% for 22-23 and by 100% in 23-24. Now, I know that's no surprise for many of you who've been to primary and secondary head associations, but for others, it's just about that confirmation that that's now the position from the Department for Education. And we, as a system, as a sector, will need to consider what that means by way of implications. And so therefore, there'll be further ongoing conversations with primary and secondary colleagues in relation to looking at what that might mean. And then the other thing I was going to say is around SEND transport, together with the schools funding paper that went to Cabinet. So too did the SEND transport paper, and they have also been agreed. So effectively, in a summary point in relation to SEND, what we're going to propose is that the mini competition part of the DPS that we currently have at the moment will cease, and that's going to be extended just for the end of this term, so it'll take us up to the end of the summer period. So therefore, there'll be no break for children, young people and parents to be able to access their SEND transport. But running in parallel to that break will be a new procurement exercise, which will go forward in terms of producing a framework with a series of lots for different activity and different functions as part of that SEND transport. And that framework agreement will also then be supported by a DPS for ad hoc work. So it means if we have new children arriving into the borough, changing in terms of circumstances, new routes, or all those kind of things, rather than having to go to an amendment to the framework contract, we can actually add them on as part of that DPS process. Again, that was agreed by the Cabinet last week and is subject to the 5-day period we talked about in terms of the funding. What we will be doing is writing out to parents, to providers and operators to make them aware of the decision once that's appropriate for us to do so, and then we'll be able to move forward with the new procurement exercise. So those are the two updates I wanted to give for forum today. And I'm more than happy to take any questions or any comments or anything back if need be, but effectively that's the position we find ourselves as a department.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Any questions? With regards to the transport exercise, Michael, with the current providers, are they aware that they're going to have their contracts essentially extended through to September? And are we anticipating any concerns with regards to that, or any sort of drop off in service because those contractors may well go off and support other schools or places because there is some uncertainty about what happens next for them?
So it's a 5-day period, which is tomorrow. We'll be writing to the existing operators to let them know of the plans that's been approved by Cabinet. We expect that there'll be further opportunities for others to be able to bid into the work, so it's not going to be a lesser offer for them. And because we're looking to extend it right to the end of the school year means that there should hopefully be no break in provision, but it also gives us the opportunity to be able to risk manage that. So if there are issues like you just mentioned, Neil, we'll be able to look at what we can put in place to be able to mitigate those risks to ensure that we've got an appropriate procurement exercise, but at the same time we've got that robust and resilient offer to make sure that children and families aren't left in the lurch. So effectively that's the kind of plan that we're doing, but we can't do it until, of course, the 5-day period, which is tomorrow. So once that's done, we'll then send out those letters of notification ahead of that. They'll know this, so I'm not talking in secrecy here. They'll know that from the Cabinet paper, and they'll know that from the Cabinet report that went in last week. But effectively, that's the formal process we have to go through. We have to wait for the 5-day period before we can actually write them formally.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody got any other questions? No, looks like you can go and do the school run now, Michael.
I'll stay till. Thank you.
All right. You can have time for a coffee before if you wanted.
That's very kind. Thanks.
Right, okay. On back to item number 5 then, please.
Okay, so item 5 is the pupil number growth funding, and also pupil number growth additional needs funding. So in this report, under sections 4.5 to 4.8, we've got 3 schools that are eligible for pupil number growth funding because of mid-year admissions. And what we do here is to look at the census, October census for 2022 compared to 2021. And if there are any increases and they're not related to local authority agreed PAN increases, then we would fund those schools. But just to give you an update in terms of the budget. So the pupil number growth funding for 21-22 was initially 1,091,000. Added to that is that the authority received a positive recruitment adjustment of 605,000, and then together with a surplus balance of 1,117,000 brought forward from 2020-21, there's total funding available of 2.8 million, and expenditure as at the 31st of December was 2.266 million. So it gives a current underspend of just over 500,000 at 547,000. And then together with the pupil number growth additional needs. Now, for anyone that's new to Forum, this was a one-off funding that we had approximately 4 to 5 years ago. It was £1 million. There was criteria set in place in terms of how that would be, how schools would become eligible for that. As at the end of 2020-21, there was a balance of 111,000, just over 111,000 with no spend. So that's the case in terms of the pupil number growth additional needs. So the 3 schools in terms of the pupil number growth funding, to give funding for that we're asking for approval is Ormston Forge, with an increase in pupils of 55, and so we're asking for a payment of 79,839 to go to that school. With Bristol Hall Academy, their increase in pupil numbers was 48 overall, but they've already received funding for 30 through the local authority agreed PAN expansion. So there's still 18 pupils to fund. So that would be for 26,129 for the period September to March. And then George Salter Academy, they have increased their pupil numbers by 54, but they've already received funding for 50 through the local authority agreed PAN. So we're asking for a payment of 5,807. So that's to do with those 3 schools for the pupil number growth. With regards to this one-off last bit of funding for additional needs, which is to fund EDACI and EAL. So when I calculated this, the total costs would, under the normal process, would have come to 173,000. However, because we've only got 111,000 available funding remaining, the allocations were prorated. And so in the table under 4.9, this is the prorated funding for all of the schools that are listed there. So you can see there's Ormston Forge, George Salter, Gospel Oak, Q3 Ticton, Shiland Collegiate, Priory Primary, Sacred Heart and St Matthews. If you look in that final column, and you can see that the total funding comes to £111,474. And so, Mr. Chair, we're just asking for approval of those payments.
Rose, can I just confirm this? Is everyone able to vote on this item? Or any restrictions?
No, there's no exceptions on this.
Right. Thanks, Rose.
Yeah.
Okay, so does it make sense, Rose, to go through each of the items separately? So we'll ask first for approval for additional funding for Ormiston Forge.
Sorry, Chair. I should have at the beginning of the meeting declared an interest in this because Shiland is in one of the comments, so I will abstain from the vote on this.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Is that your hand up there, Bob, or are you? Okay, sorry, thanks. Jamie, I can see your lips moving, but you're on mute.
Sorry, I've just had to do a quick call, sorry.
Right, okay. Right, okay then. So if we look first then at the Ormiston Form Academy, can we have a show of hands then for the additional funding of £79,839? So all those in favour, put your hand up. Have you got a count on that, Fred?
Second. I've got 12, but I think Bob's putting his hand up, not much, but in, so I think that's 13 total.
Yeah, okay, I'm agreeing with that. Thank you. Then the additional funding for Bristol Hall of 26,129. Hands up if you're in approval for that.
Okay. 13, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then we have the approval for George Salter's Academy of £5,807.
And 13 again, Chair, like that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so now we're looking at the pupil number growth funding and the additional needs. It probably makes sense to do all of these in one go rather than just go down individually. Does that make sense to you, Rose?
Yes, that's how I was hoping it would go, yeah.
Yep, okay. Unless anybody's got a particular reason for not doing that, show your hand now. No, okay. Well, we're in agreement then that the additional needs funding is awarded to the schools listed below.
Okay, Chair, I vote that's 12, with the exception that obviously Dave is abstaining. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Have you got Bob on there as well? He's got his hand up.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, right, thanks very much. Okay, thank you, everybody. And now we will move on to item number 6, which is the Special Educational Needs and High Needs Block Monitoring Report. And this is for information.
Hold on, Bob. Sorry, Dave. Can you just ask a question?
Sorry, I can't see who that is.
It's me, Neil. It's me, Chair.
All right, no, it's Mark's.
I think Mark's
question.
Mark's asking a question.
Sorry, folks. Just for my education, really, so I understand things better. Obviously, I'm all for the vote. Oh, that's all great. So, Rose, can you tell me, for the additional needs, that's item 4.9.
Yep.
What's the number of pupils you need that triggers that additional needs calculation?
So it's if over 30.
But
So
that's for the money above, isn't it? Is it still 30 for the additional needs one, 4.9?
yes.
So, St Matthew's CV has had 30 more kids in, has it? That's a hell of a burden on the primary school, isn't it?
Yes. But I think that's where with the additional needs, that's where they've had physically over 30 between the censuses. So some schools, they've received additional funding where it's a LA agreed PAN. So they might have received funding for 30, but the actual numbers that come in might only be, say, 21. But because we've guaranteed that funding, we give them the funding for the 30. Whereas, for instance, with St Matthew's, they might have we might have agreed that the funding for a LA agreed PAN of 30, and then if they get 30 plus, so say if they get 32, then they get, this additional funding.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that now. Thank you. That's great.
Okay.
And then lastly then, so on the pupil growth numbers, the ones we just say Ormiston, Bristol Hall and George Salter, should that be called, should we now be saying, because it hasn't got these other factors in it, should we now be calling that secondary basic entitlement or PUE?
Not really. This is for mid-year admissions. So basically these schools that are listed here, they're not LA agreed PANs, or if they are, the numbers have been exceeded over and above the PAN increase, and so they're entitled to that additional funding. But some of the we have in the past, it has applied to primary schools, but hopefully everyone will remember that in terms of from 2022-3 onwards, we will no longer fund mid-year admissions. So in terms of if you're an academy, we probably will still have to fund the April to August, because if we fund the March, the previous, September to March, we have to fund April to August. But then once that's funded for academies, this mid-year admissions will no longer apply.
Okay. Thanks, Rose.
Okay. All right then. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else to add? Right. Okay, Julie, when you're ready, thank you.
Hi. This is the monitoring report for the 1st of April to the 30th of November, projected forward to the 31st of March 22. The high needs block grant for 21-22, as at December 21, is 53.5 million. The reported deficit, the reported in-year surplus at the last schools forum report was 1.4 million. That's now been revised to an in-year surplus of 1.7 million. Balance brought forward obviously has remained the same at 0.6 million surplus. The Appendix 1 shows a breakdown of all the high needs against each of the sections, so that you've got more detail there, but I'll quickly run through the main variances from that report. So variation 1, there's out of borough placement, there's associated cost. It shows a 5k variance, but that's made up of a saving of £20,000 on room hire for the delivery of support to students that are awaiting a school role. Those were met virtually during COVID, and since September they've resumed face to face. So obviously there's been an in-year surplus on those. And there's a pressure of £25,000 in respect of support costs for pupils placed in out of borough maintained and academy mainstream schools. So those are the ones where not the independent, so the local authority maintained, or the academy schools. Variation 2 is an increase in EHCP assessments, which has resulted in a projected overspend of roughly £500,000 on the delegated funding to mainstream schools and academies. To be prudent, there is a £200,000 additional funding in there for Sandwell Community School, which may not be needed. The pupil tracking was only received just before Christmas, so that will be updated at the next schools forum report, so that you'll have more information on that going forward. Variation 3, High Point, opened on the 1st of September. Again, this has been reported to Schools Forum previously. It was initially thought that the place element would be met through the high needs block, but we've subsequently found that in July 21 that this would be funded directly with no impact on Sandwell's high needs block. So it's resulted in an in-year surplus of 221k. Variation 4, an amount of £480,000 from the early years grant is used to offset early support for pupils in private provider settings and those in mainstream early years settings. This North support is continued through terms 1 and terms 2 when pupil access reception, whilst the assessment for an EHCP is concluded. An additional sum of £70,000 has been allocated in this financial year, bringing the overall funding to a contribution of £550,000. Table below shows the anticipated shortfall in the early years funding contribution. And I think this was a question that was asked on the previous Schools Forum. So in mainstream settings, the spend at the moment, as at November, was 472,000. The anticipated outturn is 520. Private provider settings was 328,000, and the anticipated outturn is 478,000. So the total spend at November is 800,000, and in total, for mainstream and private provider settings, it's 998,000. The early years grant contribution is standing currently at 550,000, which is leaving a shortfall then of 448,000. Questions were raised during the consultation, the SN consultation working group, really the level of the grant contribution and the possibility that this could increase going forward. That's something that still needs to be looked at. Total variance, variation 5 equating to 372,000 across 9 service areas. These are mainly due to staff turnover, maternity leave, opting out of the local authority pension scheme and full-time budgeted posts covered by staff on reduced hours. Variation 6, preventing secondary exclusions team, that's not been appointed to in 2021, and it's been agreed as part of the SEN consultation that this would be used in future to fund the reintegration officer posts currently funded by schools through the exclusion levy. So although that expenditure is an in-year saving this year, next year that funding will be used to fund the reintegration officers. Alternative provision was budgeted at 843,000 in December 20. Based on the levers in July 21, close monitoring of the placements by the alternative provision panel, the saving is currently predicted to be 499,000. This has been revised from previous monitoring reports and shows a higher saving. We'll continue to monitor that closely and I'll report back to you if anything changes dramatically on that. When I look at the budget for the next year in 22-23, then the budget will be reduced in line with what we think the anticipated spend will be for that year. The SEN development is shown an underspend of 760,000. This budget head covers independent appeals and reports and any agreed funding that does not clearly fit into any other budget head. The variance is predominantly the high needs balancing figure of 440,000 at the beginning of the year. So that was our anticipated in-year surplus at the beginning of the financial year. And the high needs, and there's adjustments in there for the high needs grant initial settlement, and there's been a favourable adjustment to that settlement at 315,000. Variation 9 is a favourable variance of 191,000 against children with disabilities team. High needs Brox previously contributed 95,800 to CWD team. Questions have been raised in the past about what this is used for, and as the contribution was not required in 2021, but it was accrued, this has now been reversed and the fund has been transferred back into the high needs block. And it's also, because that's been transferred, it's also been agreed that that will not be needed going forward. So that means that we'll have the budget that we allocated for 21-22 also as a saving in this financial year. Variation 10, there's a favourable variance of £97,000 against the non-statutory SEN contribution from the high needs block, and that's due to staff turnover. Again, variations, slippages in staff appointments, opting out of the pension scheme, reduced hours, so it's a combination of things. I normally give you an update on the focus provision, special schools and Prue Place funding, but because the information that I gave to you at the last schools forum was as up to date as it possibly could be, during the timescale there was nothing else to add to this. So the data on this will be provided at the next meeting on the 14th of March 22, so that at least you'll have more up-to-date figures rather than me reporting what you've already seen previously. And a separate report will also be provided at the next meeting on Prue funding, because I think that was a question that a response and a request from the last schools forum, that you wanted us to produce a small report based on occupancy, funding and commission places. Okay, so that's the end of the report. It's just for information, so if anybody's got any queries.
Okay, any questions? No. Can I just go back to variation number 8 there, Julie, where it talks about currently covers independent appeals reports and any funding agreed that does not clearly fit into other budget heads. I mean, it's a significant amount of money in this sort of budget heading, if you like. Is it possible to have a breakdown of what exactly is in that for the next meeting, please?
Yeah, right there. No problem. 450,000 is literally a difference between how much do I allocate the budgets for, what's the grants, and then that shortfall is put into there. So that's why there's £440,000 in there at the moment. But yeah, I can do a breakdown at the next one.
Thanks. And then just finally from me, I see another hand coming up there. Just finally from me on I don't know if this is a question that hits to some of the other variations as well. Obviously, we've just been informed that there's going to be a hit to the school improvement budget. Is there any aspects of the high needs block affected by this? So when we look down and we look at things like the exclusions teams and those other services, are they potentially going to be impacted?
As far as I know, the school improvement will have no impact at all on the funding in the high needs block.
Okay,
No.
thanks. Right, we've got a number of hands up here. So if we start with, is it S. Baker, please?
Hi, I don't know about anybody else. I'd really appreciate a little bit of, this might be outside of this meeting, but a little bit of more guidance and support around the funding for SEN, because I think there's an awful lot of figures that are bandied round, and I really try and listen hard in these meetings and understand, but sometimes it can get a little bit confusing how we go from surplus 1 minute to deficit the next minute and then back again. So I'd really appreciate, just on a personal level, and I don't know whether anybody else is out there that would feel the same, just a little bit of support and guidance around the funding for SEN and where all these figures come from and how it's all calculated. I don't know whether this is the point to say that or whether it's outside of this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, during this financial year, we haven't gone from surplus to deficit to surplus. I mean, basically, the in-year surplus is always been an in-year surplus in this financial year. The surplus brought forward from last year was what we closed down at last year. The reason that there is variance is because obviously at the beginning of the year when we do these budgets, which is the budgets are prepared in round about December, January. So now for the following year, we have to make assumptions that children are going to be in a particular provision at that point in time. We also have to make an assumption that there have been new students coming on board that we know we may have to place during that year, but we don't know where they're going to go or what the funding is going to be. So there's an assumption made then. It's only when the children are actually placed and we know what the funding and the costs are that we can start to adjust the figures on a monthly basis, and it is literally adjusting them on a month-by-month basis when we do the monitoring, because children can move between provisions quite quickly, and they can also move in and out of borough as well. So there's lots of variations on the students that we're dealing with, which is why there appears to be a lot of changes. But it's basically looking at it as soon as it happens, because we can't preempt where children are going to go and what's going to happen.
Yeah, I understand. I just find maybe it's just me on a personal level. I just feel that, you know, we're asked every month or every couple of months to note these reports, and I just think, for me, I just feel I need to understand the figures a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, to support that, actually, we've got quite a number of new members to Schools Forum this academic year, and if you notice on item agenda 8, we're looking at introducing some training for new members, where we're going to have the opportunity to go through some of sort of, you know, specifics around budgets, what Schools Forum does, what it represents, how the delegated budgets work, and everything. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched, I don't think, to have an element of that which is particularly inclusive of the high needs block, and whether or not that's integrated into the the training that we set up in the first instance, or if it's a separate element, we can let you know in due course. But I think that's something that's probably important for a number of people to have access to.
Exactly. I mean, obviously spotting it on the agenda later on, but I thought it was, you know, at this point, it was just something for me that I think is really important. I need to get my head round a little bit more.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would a starting point for that be worth collating some frequently asked questions, so that when we do start looking at training for new members, we can make sure that we've covered a lot of the areas that people are asking questions about?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, Julian. I think, Fred, if you make a note of that, that might give us a starting point for the training that we schedule. Thanks for that. Okay, Wendy, you've got a question. Hands up.
Yeah, it's about variation 4, because obviously there's a big difference, isn't there, obviously, than what was budgeted and what was spent, and you said it was being looked at. So does that mean the budget's going to be different moving forward? Because on the ground you can kind of see the number of children accessing the early years grant has gone through the roof, really, and I'm sure that's the same in lots of other schools. So I kind of wondered what the plan was, so we're not sitting here, I guess, in the same position this time next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we need to look at, because it's a combination of the high needs block and the early years block. So that's something that possibly Rose might want to answer going forward.
Yeah,
is that something you might want to answer going forward, Rose?
I couldn't get my mouse to work. In terms of this, as Julia's highlighted, it is a combination between the high needs block and the early years block. So we do need to get some, do some analysis work and look at budgets going forward in conjunction with the early years lead.
Okay, thanks, Rose. Anybody got any other questions, queries, points to raise? Okay, right, moving on then. We've had the verbal update from Michael, which then takes us on to agenda item number 8. And over to you briefly, Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we've already just covered this basically. Essentially what this has come from is, I think it was from memory, the Vice Chair in the agenda briefing meeting who raised the possibility of putting some training on for new members and existing members, actually, who may not have had any training before, which we all thought was a good idea. I think it was Wendy just then, or was it Sue, just said about having to frequently ask questions, which might help generate what the training should be focused on. So what we're planning on doing is putting a couple of dates on, and these will be separate dates outside of forum meetings, so they won't be tagged on to the end. And we'll try and put a couple of dates on and invite members. So just watch this space. We'll obviously liaise with the Chair and Vice Chair going forward and get that training drawn up with officers. And then we'll be writing out to you to let you know what dates we're going to be putting on. And the sessions will be recorded as well. So if anyone can't make it, then hopefully they'll be able to access the recorded version. And if there are any questions they have, they can obviously email officers afterwards and try and get any answers as well.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Anybody got any questions regarding the training? Right, okay, so any other business?
I think it's good to say, Chair, hopefully the next meeting will be in the building, but we'll obviously be in contact with yourself and the Vice Chair along the way and make that decision nearer the time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And just for information, the next meeting date has been set for the 14th of March. Okay, so unless there's any further questions or queries, we'll close the meeting and thank everybody for their attendance and enjoy the rest of your weeks.
Thank you.